Welcome to Melrose Unitarian Universalist Church. Our service today is called The Eighth Principle and a Sustainable Future. Good morning. How are you all surviving all this snow? Aren't we lucky to already be Zoom only? I hope all of you are warm inside and enjoying your coffee. I'm Tara Tresner-Kirsch. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the music director here at MUUC. Reverend Suzanne has the day off,
It's
and I'm
not that.
happy.
That unmuted so that they can hear us. No, I just leave that. What does that
Maybe we
blue
have
say?
somebody off mute. Reverend Suzanne has the day off, and I am happy to serve as your worship host this morning. If you've read your email news, you'll know that we have an important guest speaker today. Not him. Paula Cole-Jones is one of the founders of the Eighth Principle Project. She is a lifelong UU and a management consultant with over 20 years of experience in designing and facilitating workshops and dialogues for leaders and organizations. Big welcome to you, Paula. Several members of our church's anti-racism team have been following the Eighth Principle Project for about a year now, learning about how to bring this important conversation to our congregation. So we are excited about Paula's visit today. In fact, several of us met with Reverend Suzanne earlier this week to talk about the Eighth Principle, and we helped to make a video about it that you'll see in today's story time. So watch for that. You'll see some more of your favorite church friends then, and please feel free to stay for our virtual coffee hour after church when we can all talk with Paula and members of the anti-racism team. Just a couple other announcements for you this morning. Make a note now. Next Sunday's worship will also be special. It will be presented by Reverend Suzanne and the members of our immigration ministry team, who will give you updates about their work this year, all the clients we've been serving, along with news about a new project we are undertaking. It's really exciting, so don't miss it. In other news, Mari McQuaid is helping to organize a discussion group around the book Reverend Suzanne preached about last week. If you're interested in the way of integrity, see the item in the email news. You'll also find just below it links to join in the class called Beloved Conversations, Anti-Racism Workshop, which Dan Franklin talked about last week, and or links to sign up for our February fellowship events. Please read your email news. A special thank you now to Wendy Mastronardi, who is serving as our chat host on Zoom today. Wendy is also our collector this year. So just last week, hi Wendy, she sent out tax statements to all of you who pledge. So you can say thank you for those in the chat box now if you'd like. Thank you, Wendy, for all the work you do. And now, let's take a moment to greet all of our friends and friends to be here at church. Let's do our weekly ritual of switching to gallery view to wave hello to everybody. I gotta remember how to do mine. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Oh, lots of beautiful faces here this morning. So good to see you all. All right. And our call to worship. Good morning. Come into this circle of love and justice. Come into this community where we can dream and believe in those dreams. Come into this holy space where we remember who we are and how we want to live. Come now and let us worship together. Those are words from Marilyn Sewell. And now, along with UUs everywhere, we light the symbol of our faith, the flaming chalice. This morning, as I light my chalice at home, please join me and also light the chalice in your home or a candle. Longtime member Beth Yergrau will now give us our chalice reading. Beth?
On the brink, by Leslie Takahashi. All that we have ever loved and all that we have ever been stands with us on the brink of all that we aspire to create, a deeper peace, a larger love, a more embracing hope, a deeper joy in this life we share.
Thank you, Beth. Our chalice is lit, and our opening hymn this morning is We Would Be One. As printed in our hymnal, the Singing Living Tradition, and today, as we discuss the eighth principle, I am reminded that the words for this song were written by a Unitarian Universalist minister, a Unitarian minister for the National Youth Convention of 1954. At this pivotal conference, the two youth groups from the then separate denominations voted to merge. In doing so, these youth led the way to the joining of Unitarianism and Universalism into one faith. Please join me and our choir in singing We Would Be One. And now let us join together in the words of our covenant, followed by the song of aspiration. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. This is our great covenant, one with another and with our God. Yes. Our story today is a collaboration. The first part is an animation, a fun introduction to the eighth principle made by the intern minister at our San Francisco church. And she ends with the question, what does the eighth principle mean to you? So, for the second part, Reverend Suzanne asked, let's give him a minute. He wants to host worship too. So, for the second part, Reverend Suzanne asked our anti-racism team to share with you their answers to that question. The video is less than 6 minutes long.
What is the eighth principle? Well, you know our 7 principles, right? They're things that matter to us. Things that guide how we are as a community, how we treat each other, and what we want to bring more of into the world. Just like each of us is always learning and growing, we know our principles have to grow sometimes too. This is the story of the eighth principle. A few years ago, some UU leaders spoke up. They told us these principles we love, they left something out. Like many who'd come before them, they spoke about how people still aren't being treated fairly because of the color of their skin, or where they come from, or other things that make them who they are. And that happens not only in the world at large, but even in our congregations, even in this one. So we need to do more to make sure that all people can feel welcome and loved here. We need to say more about our commitments to fight against racism, because racism hurts everybody. In fact, it hurts all 7 of our principles. And so, the eighth principle was born. The eighth principle is a commitment to fight against racism and oppression, and to build a beloved community of love and trust and belonging here in our church and in the world around us. We're going to be talking about the eighth principle a lot this spring, learning about it and what it means for this community. What does the eighth principle mean to you?
To me, the eighth principle is a huge step forward in our church's commitment to furthering racial justice, because it would propel us to go beyond banners and address racial justice in all our work.
Working with the anti-racism team toward the adoption of the eighth principle will help our congregation be more intentional about seeking ways to eliminate racism from ourselves and our culture.
I support the eighth principle because it's a way to manifest our first and very foundational principle of our faith, and that is to value the inherent worth and dignity of every single person. We live in a time and a place where there are structures and institutions and practices in place that either don't recognize or aim to deny that worth of individuals, particularly BIPOC individuals, because of racism. And so by adopting the vision and the work of the eighth principle to dismantle racism, we're taking steps together toward creating a community where we will become anti-racist. And ultimately, I think of the children. So I think of the children of MUUC, whom we know and whom we love. And I think of all the children whom we don't yet know and have not yet been seen. And to me, adopting the eighth principle is really an act and a legacy of love.
We have sisters and brothers in our own land who are denied the right to vote, who are denied fair treatment and fair pay, who are denied decent education, who are denied loving whom they wish. Studying the eighth principle will help us all answer questions like, who's in power here? And how can we make this horrible situation better?
To me, the eighth principle is a commitment to undo racism and build a more just world. I believe this journey will feed the soul individually and collectively. For me, this work is expansive, necessary, and even liberating. We have much to learn and much to do.
The eighth principle is important for keeping our faith alive and thriving. It's about listening to people whose experiences might be different than our own. It is a declaration that just saying each person is important isn't enough. When it comes to racism and other oppressions, there is real work to be done. The eighth principle calls us as Unitarian Universalists, calls our church communities, calls our entire denomination into doing that crucial work.
Every week at this time, we pause for a time of meditation, each reflecting in our own way. Let's start by relaxing in our chairs, feeling our feet on the floor, and letting our bodies settle. Let's breathe in and out together. First, we'll share in our centering song, and after that, we will sit together in silence for a few moments. Then we'll speak our joys and our sorrows, and I will lead us in a prayer. Our centering song this month is based on the Buddhist meditation. May I be filled with loving kindness. Here's a video made by our choir this past fall.
May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be whole.
And now, our weekly practice of sharing with one another the joys and sorrows of our lives. Our personal milestones that we witness and hold in compassion. Now, if you have a sorrow to share with us today, a sad personal milestone to share, please type it into the chat box now and I will read them aloud. A remembrance from Gretchen, for my Aunt Dorothy, who died at her home in Lincoln, Nebraska on Monday at the age of 96. She was the last of my mother's generation, 5 smart, strong, funny, compassionate, and caring women. They are all greatly missed. From Chuck, a candle of sorrow upon learning of the passing of my oldest, dearest friend from college. Greg had lived a free-spirited life in Hawaii for many years. Let us pause, holding together in compassion. May we reach out to all those who are hurting with a gentle touch. I light this one candle as a beacon of care for all the sorrows spoken and unspoken today. And now I'll ask for all the joys you'd like to share. Please type them into the chat box and I will read them aloud. Well, I'll start with the joy. Joy for the beautiful snow, as much as it's trouble. And joy for watching it get shoveled outside my house with our shoveling service. Any other joys this morning? A joy from Terry and Josh. Orion Miller was born at home under the full wolf moon at 2 a.m. on January 19th, weighing in at 7 pounds, 12 ounces, lots of hair, and a very pleasant disposition. Congratulations, Terry and Josh, on your first grandkid. From Chuck, Jane, and Julia, a candle of joy for the birth of our, babies! Our new great niece, Aria May, Friday in Bangor, Maine. From Dan, a candle of gratitude for my son, Alex, shoveling us out. Lots of gratitude for all the shovelers out there. And from Anne and Doug for neighbors helping neighbors. Thank you for sharing these joys. Oh, one more. Joy for Jackson, turning 2 this week. He lost his mom at just a few hours old, but he is thriving and happy and much loved. Thank you for sharing these joys. They help us to connect us and remind us all of the beauty of living. I will now light one more candle to shine out our thanks for all the many blessings in our lives. Now a prayer from the Reverend William Sinkford, our minister in Portland, Oregon, and former UUA president. Spirit of life and love, dear God of all nations, there is so much work to do. We've only begun to imagine justice and mercy. Help us hold fast to our vision of what can be. May we see the hope in our history and find the courage and the voice to work for that constant rebirth of freedom and justice. That is our dream. Amen. Now is the time for our offertory. MUUC is an independent organization supported by your generous annual pledge. You may also contribute to our weekly collection plate, which we split every month with a deserving cause. You can donate either way using the orange button at the top right corner of our homepage, melroseuu.org. For January, half of our collection will go to Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, or BLUE, a national group that supports UUs of African descent so that they can gather, share resources, and help our whole faith become more diverse, more relevant, and more liberatory. For our offertory music this morning, our guest speaker, Paula Cole-Jones, has asked us to share this version of a favorite UU hymn, Spirit of Life. This recording was made at Paula's home church, All Souls, DC, by musicians there. This is the way they sing it every week in English and also in Spanish. Please enjoy.
Good morning. Today's reading will be given in two parts. Part 1, We Are Worthy by Elandria Williams. We are worthy not because of what we produce, but because of who we are. We are divine bodies of light and darkness. You are not worthy because of what you offer, not because of what is in your mind, not for the support you give others, not for what you give at all. We are worthy and are whole just because. In this great turning, in this great pandemic, in this radical readjustment and realignment, we are not disposable. We are needed. We are the very people that have withstood everything that has been thrown at us as people. And as Maya Angelou would say, still I rise. We arise from the pain. We rise from the grief. We arise from the limits people place on us and the limits we place on ourselves. We rise to be the children and the ancestors. We rise to be our true selves in relationship to our families and communities, recognizing our liberating and whole selves, honoring them and others as we strive for abundant communities, abundant lives, abundant relationships, and abundant values and cultural manifestations. We are worthiness personified. End of reading. I want to start by appreciating the voices of your members who spoke to why the eighth principle is needed. I appreciate you naming the institutional racism and oppression and the issue of voting rights. So it's a pleasure for me to be here with you today in support of your work to pass the eighth principle. At this point, we have 150 adoptions of the eighth principle, and there very likely will be some more today. The eighth principle calls us to be on the journey towards spiritual wholeness by working to build the beloved community, by actively and accountably dismantling racism and oppression in ourselves and in our institutions. This principle builds on many decades of work by many people. It updates the covenant we have with each other as expressed in our 7 principles. Excuse me a second. Goodness gracious, wouldn't you know? It updates the covenant we have with ourselves as expressed in our 7 principles to include us being in covenant with the beloved community and being in action to fulfill the promise of Unitarian Universalism as a progressive faith community. I want to issue a challenge to you. Try going for a month, seeing through the frame of liberation, the eighth principle, and sustainable futures. I did that. It's a lot harder than you might imagine. So many things become relevant in that framing. In thinking about liberation, we should be asking ourselves, why do we have to fight the same battles and engage these same struggles over and over and over again? What would it be like to be in a free United States of America? Can we imagine it? Can we do the work? Can we pass on to our children a stronger and freer democracy? Or will our children be fighting these same battles 10, 20, 30 years from now? And if they have to fight these battles, what kind of country will we be living in? We are not done yet with the work of guaranteeing citizens our fundamental rights. Voting is one of those fundamental rights. So is equal protection under the law. Why would we let anyone deny these rights to people? Protecting each other's rights is one of the practices of dismantling racism and oppression. It is a practice of building beloved community. The eighth principle will help us to develop more spiritual practices and prepare us for the healing that is so much needed in ourselves, in our communities, in our churches and our institutions. That healing will potentially help to change society and the future. It will move Unitarian Universalists closer to reclaiming our prophetic voice, as the UU minister, Reverend Paul Razor, so well describes in his essay by the same name, Proclaiming Our Prophetic Voice. I recommend that you read it in the book entitled Soul Work, Anti-Racist Theologies and Dialogue. Reverend Razor wrote, and I quote, "We Unitarian Universalists have been shaped by the very powers and structures we now want to dismantle. The social transformation we seek requires spiritual transformation as well. Without this, our anti-racism work, like other prophetic practices for social change, becomes difficult to sustain, or it retreats into the safety of disengaged analysis or internal debate. We will have to dedicate our heads, hands, and hearts to the task. And in doing so, may we reclaim the prophetic voice that is constantly tempted to become lost in our accommodation to the very culture we seek to change." End quote. We face many crises at this time, but I want to speak to two specific crises because there is a lesson that we must learn if we want to build a better society. We must face the world we live in and work to co-create the future that we want to have. Now, these two crises are, one, the protection or lack of protection of a multiracial, multicultural democracy in the United States. And the second crisis is climate crisis, which is global, and we have to face our nation's role in it. We know that both of these crises are looming. We are putting ourselves and future generations at risk because too often we do not act until the crisis is at our own doorstep, posing a personal threat. Now, the problem with that is that people who have most of the protections because of privilege, be it economic, racial, gender privilege, or more, the people who have the most protections are often the last to feel the impact of a systemic crisis. And by then, it may be too late to stop it from happening. When looking at climate crisis, people were warned about global warming years ago. The warnings began in the 1950s, then again in the 1970s. They finally caught public attention by the late 1980s, and corporations spent millions of dollars to refute global warming and to lobby, fighting against environmental regulations. By the year 2000, the alarm had been sounded, and it was urgent. The use of fossil fuel and deforestation were foundational to the problem. What did we do to stop the progression of global warming? What have we done since then? We are living an unsustainable lifestyle, and yet we continue to accrue the things that come with prosperity, myself included, with few signs of this culture of consumption and extraction slowing down. The public was paying attention to global warming by the year 2000. That was also the election year that changed what we knew as democracy in this country. In 2000, Al Gore and George W. Bush ran a close election. The voter suppression entered the story in a major way. In Florida, 12,000 eligible voters were purged from the rolls after being wrongly put on lists as convicted felons. African Americans made up 11% of the electorate, and yet they were purged by 41%. They were 41% of the people purged. Bush won that election by 537 votes, but the number of people who were purged was 22 times larger than his winning margin. You can find more on these stats in The Nation and Rolling Stone. We, the people, did not adequately respond to protect voting rights then. We're talking about what, over 20 years ago. We did not protect the voting rights then. We did not adequately respond to institutional racism in the election system. The Nation magazine said that this led to a new wave of voter disenfranchisement, and we have seen it ongoingly in every election since then. In 2013, the Supreme Court gutted the protections from the Voting Rights Act. Harry Berman wrote in The Nation magazine in 2015, mind you, these were 2015 words, and I quote, "The result of the Supreme Court decision has been the most significant effort to restrict voting rights since the Jim Crow era. From 2011 to 2015, 468 voting restrictions had been introduced in 49 states. That number is much higher today. Half of the states in the country had passed new laws making it harder to vote. None of this would have been possible if it wasn't for the 2000 election in Florida," end quote. So remember, by 2000, the alarm on climate change had been sounded, and Al Gore was ready to address it nationally. Corporate dollars and voter suppression went into full swing, targeting people of color to stop that national focus on climate change. I would say that it was a snowball effect from then on. If we do not come to terms with the connection between climate change, corporate power, voter suppression, and mass incarceration, which was another way of suppressing votes across the country, and institutional racism, if we do not come to terms with the connection of these things, we will never work our way out of this, and we'll never understand what true peace could be. Solving these crises is obviously going to take a greater level of cooperation than we have mustered in this country so far. If we had taken either climate change, voter suppression, or racism more seriously, we might have prevented the crises that have us wondering, will this democracy and will this precious planet ever recover? How many of you are wondering? I am. The history of human beings is a kaleidoscope of stories about power, extraction, oppression, injustice, and the fight for liberation. A culture of privilege in the United States entices all of us to choose comfort and entertainment over the shared investment in undoing injustices and protecting the common good. In other words, we have a culture that minimizes people's willingness to see the struggle for liberation of other people as a struggle for their own liberation. We are in a culture of individualism that separates us from each other, separates us from the whole and what is in our best interest. It separates us from the universal truth that we are all in this together. Lila Watson says it well, and I quote, if you have come here to help me because you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together, end quote. When we situate and engage ourselves in solidarity with people fighting for liberation, we too become liberated. Oh yes, we are all in this boat together, folks. The truth is, liberation protects democracy, and democracy protects the common good, our air, water, food supply, our schools, roads, and communities. Democracy gives us a better chance at sustainable futures. Our collective liberation is in our hands. Our response to climate change is directly related to our response to voter suppression. Please don't forget that. Every time that we protect someone's rights and correct the systems, we are planting liberty and justice for more people and for future generations. We should not have to fight these same battles over and over again. Our children shouldn't have to fight these battles. And in the beloved community, they wouldn't have to. Now I close my words today with part 2 of the reading, We Are Worthy by Elandria Williams. You and we are worthy and deserve a life where we are not always fighting for our existence. Imagine what we could create if we were not always in the struggle. Imagine what we could envision if we could just be let to go there. So tired of always having to resist, to fight, demanding, pushing. To everyone that has the courage, the power, the ability to co-create what we want and need, while rooting in what we can't lose and who we are. You are the visionary. You are the hope. You are our ancestors' dreams. No, you might not ever end up on some list somewhere, but you are on a list in someone's heart and mind. And if it's in how you move in the world, so people can see by example, you are the embodiment of what we need. Thanks to all that are the embodiment not of productivity, but the embodiment of radical love, care, and sanctuary. It's time, embodiment time. Embodiment, living one's values out loud. Let me every day live my values out loud. Let us every day live our values out loud, embodying our values, not the productivity quotient, beyond productivity, past productivity, true embodiment, life. May it be so, and amen. And now please join us for the following hymn. Our closing hymn, We Are Building a New Way.
We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a new way, feeling stronger every day. We are building a new way. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. We are working to be free of hate and greed and jealousy. We are working to be free. We can feel every need. We can feel every need. We can feel our every need. Start with love, that is the seed. We can feel our every need. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Without these, this world will die. Peace and freedom is our cry. We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a new way, feeling stronger every day. We are building a new way.
Please join me. We extinguish the flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Amen. Our service has ended.